The champagne shimmered under the chandelier's glow as Dorian Blake raised his glass, the crowd parting around him like a sea of silk and glitter. He stood tall at the center of the ballroom, a man sculpted by success. Immaculate tuxedo, salt and pepper hair just slightly tousled for effect, and the kind of charming half-smile that masked a lifetime of rehearsed lies. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice rich and smooth. "To rewriting the rules. To love that never asks for permission. Only faith." The crowd roared. Cameras clicked. Isla, radiant in a backless gown the color of pearl, beamed beside him. 27, impossibly beautiful, and now officially Mrs. Blake. She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. He kissed her knuckles gently, then pulled her in for a chaste but calculated kiss. The image was perfect, viral ready. PR gold. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and spread the word, and tell us where you're watching from. But in that split second, as the room erupted in applause, something in Dorian's eyes flickered. A tremor. A breath he forgot to take. He scanned the crowd briefly. No, not scanned, searched. As if expecting someone. Or something. And when he didn't find it, his jaw loosened just slightly. The pianist resumed playing. Waiters glided across the marble floor, balancing silver trays with shrimp and champagne. Isla was swept into a circle of admirers. Fashion bloggers, influencers, bored wives, and Dorian was left momentarily alone near the 5-tier wedding cake, towering like a sugary monument to their curated happiness. His fingers brushed against his pocket, not the one with the vows. The other one, the hidden compartment of his custom suit. The folded envelope still rested there, sealed, unread, but always with him. He had meant to burn it years ago. "Sir, a quick photo?" a young photographer asked, breaking his trance. Dorian nodded and posed, chin tilted, shoulders squared. Picture perfect, again. But the moment the flash faded, his composure cracked. He loosened his collar slightly and walked toward the balcony, ignoring the congratulations tossed his way. Outside, the evening air was cool and dry. He exhaled, watching the city lights blink below like distant warning signs. Behind him, laughter floated through the glass doors. Isla's laugh, carefree and uninformed. She didn't know everything. Not yet. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering, then pressed decline. It buzzed again. Same number. No message. Just the call. He pocketed it, knuckles white around the frame. Back inside, Isla called to him. "Darling, they're cutting the cake." He turned, smiled. The smile he had perfected over years of investor meetings and television interviews. "Be right there, but the call..." Something about it wasn't random. It had the timing of someone who knew, not just about the wedding, but about the envelope in his pocket, about what came before Isla. He stepped back into the ballroom, his footsteps silent on the polished floor. The applause rose again. But for a moment, just a moment, Dorian didn't hear it. His eyes drifted to the grand doors at the entrance of the hall. And for some inexplicable reason, his stomach turned, as if something was coming, something with his name on it. The ballroom buzzed with music and chatter, crystal glasses clinking as guests circled the towering cake. Isla, glowing beneath the soft gold light, gripped the silver knife with both hands, laughing as Dorian guided her fingers over the handle. Cameras rose in unison. Every phone in the room was ready to capture the perfect slice of happiness. The knife pressed into frosting when a murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward the glass doors at the far end of the hall. The music wavered, then faltered, as the pianist's fingers stilled. Outside, through the wide panes, headlights cut across the driveway. A sleek black limousine rolled to a slow stop. Dorian's grip stiffened around Isla's hand. His smile froze, thin and sharp as glass. "Who's that?" Isla whispered, her tone still playful, unaware of the storm brewing. The driver stepped out, circled the car, and opened the door with a practiced sweep. Silence bled into the hall as heels clicked against the pavement. Evelyn. She emerged with poise sharpened by fury, a crimson dress clinging to her like liquid flame. Her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders, her lips curved in a knowing smirk. She looked nothing like the broken woman the tabloids had once speculated about. Tonight she was radiant, dangerous. And then came the sound, small shoes tapping against stone. 1, 2, 3, 4. The guests gasped. 4 children stepped out, no older than 3, dressed identically in miniature suits, wide eyes, soft curls, round faces, and every face a mirror of Dorian's. Isla's hand tightened around his arm. "Dorian?" He didn't answer. His chest heaved once, shallow and quick, and for the first time that evening his charm deserted him. The crowd erupted in whispers. "Are those?" They looked just like, "Is this real?" Phones tilted forward, capturing every angle. A woman near the front nearly dropped her champagne flute. Evelyn's stride was unhurried, deliberate. She didn't rush to cause a scene. She allowed the silence, the gasps, the murmurs to build like pressure in a sealed room. The children followed close behind, obedient, unnervingly calm. She stopped at the entrance. A hostess hesitated, stepping forward, but Evelyn brushed past her with nothing more than a steady glare. She belonged here. She wanted everyone to see. Dorian stepped forward instinctively, but Isla clung tighter to him, nails digging into his arm. Her voice was barely a breath. "Tell me this isn't happening." His throat worked, but no sound came. His perfectly rehearsed lines, the ones he always had for investors, for journalists, for anyone, were gone. He was cornered, speechless before the truth made flesh. The children's eyes fixed on him as if they knew exactly who he was. One clutched a toy car. Another dragged a small blanket, its corner gathering dust from the polished floor. They were not afraid. They didn't need to be, because Evelyn was. The guests pulled out their phones, recording, whispering names, attaching hashtags in their heads before they'd even typed them. Isla's cheeks flushed scarlet, her breath quick and shallow. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice clear and cutting through the hush. "Congratulations, Dorian. Starting fresh must feel so sweet." Her eyes flicked to Isla, then back to him. "But you forgot to invite your children." The crowd collectively inhaled. Every camera zoomed in. Dorian's lips parted, but nothing emerged. His terror was naked now, undeniable. And as the music died entirely, Evelyn guided the 4 boys forward, each step echoing like a drumbeat. The cake behind them leaned slightly, the untouched slice trembling on its plate. Isla whispered again, this time sharper, almost pleading. "Dorian, say something." But he couldn't. His gaze was locked on the children, 4 little faces that stripped him bare in front of everyone who mattered, and across the ballroom, as Evelyn smiled coldly, the celebration curdled into dread. The night had just shifted, and nothing would return to the way it was. The ballroom air was thick, humming with the nervous energy of dozens of guests too afraid to breathe too loudly. Evelyn had followed the children inside, her crimson dress a streak of fire against the cream and gold interior. She stopped just beyond the cake table, her hand resting lightly on the shoulder of the nearest boy. The silence spread outward like smoke, swallowing the music, the laughter, the pretense of celebration. "These are yours, Dorian." Her voice wasn't raised, but it cut through the hall with the weight of a hammer. Calm, unshakable, deadly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Another whispered, "He has kids?" Phones tilted higher, recording. A sea of glowing screens captured every angle, each second immortalized. Dorian's face hardened. His smile was gone, his jaw clenched. But his eyes betrayed him, darting to Isla, then back to Evelyn, then to the 4 boys who stood like evidence with pulse and breath. "That's a lie," he said, his tone smooth but shaking at the edges. "A cruel one. You're humiliating yourself." Evelyn didn't blink. "No, Dorian. I'm giving you back what you tried to erase." She lifted her hand slightly, gesturing to the children. "Your sons." The crowd murmured louder, the sound swelling like a storm. Isla turned on him, her hand clutching his sleeve, her voice trembling. "What is she talking about? Dorian, tell me this isn't true. Tell me." He leaned toward her, lowering his voice in what looked like intimacy but carried the stench of desperation. "She's lying, Isla. She always lies. This is her last attempt to ruin me. You know how bitter she's been since the divorce." Evelyn's smile was faint, practiced. She slid her purse from her shoulder, set it delicately on the cake table beside the untouched silver knife, and unzipped it with deliberate slowness. Every eye followed her hands. From inside she drew a small folder. Cream cardstock, edges worn, the kind of envelope that didn't belong in a room filled with champagne and roses. She held it out. "DNA results," she said simply. Isla's face drained of color. Her fingers slipped from Dorian's sleeve. You had a test?" "Of course," Evelyn replied. Her eyes locked on Dorian's, merciless. Because I knew the day would come when you'd try to erase them as you erased me. Dorian's nostrils flared. He took a step forward, hand raised as if to seize the folder, but Evelyn pulled it back. Don't touch it, she warned. Her tone still quiet, still calm, but sharp enough to slice the air. I'll hand it to the judge. Or better yet, she tilted her head toward the phones lifted high. To the press. Isla's chest rose and fell rapidly, tears pooling in her eyes. Dorian, she whispered, her voice breaking. Why would she have this? Why would she bring children who look exactly like you if this wasn't real? She's staging it, he snapped too quickly. God, Isla, don't let her manipulate you. She's always been vindictive. She's trying to destroy us. Destroy us? Evelyn's laugh was low, bitter, vibrating with years of swallowed rage. No, Dorian. You destroyed yourself. You walked away from your own blood. And now they're here. Look at them. The smallest boy tugged gently at Evelyn's dress, his wide eyes fixed on Dorian. Mama, is that… Evelyn knelt beside him, smoothing his hair back. Yes, sweetheart. That's your father. The word landed like a detonation. Gasps. Phones zooming closer. Isla staggered back, her hand pressed to her mouth. Dorian's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Raw terror, then fury. He turned to the crowd, forcing his voice steady. Everyone, please. Don't listen to this circus act. My lawyers will handle this. She's unstable. She's lying. But the crowd wasn't with him anymore. Their eyes were on the children, on Evelyn's unflinching calm, on the folder that trembled faintly in her hand. Isla's sob broke the last thread of control. Evelyn rose, folder still in her grip, gaze never leaving his. You can spin your lies tonight, Dorian. But you can't bury the truth again. It's standing in front of you, and it has your eyes. Dorian opened his mouth to reply, but the words died there, strangled by the weight of too many witnesses. Cameras clicked. Guests whispered. The air was a verdict waiting to fall, and as the tension coiled tighter, Evelyn slipped the folder back into her purse. Don't worry, she said, her voice smooth with promise. You'll have your chance to explain. To the world. The children clung to her skirts as she turned toward the doors. The silence she left behind was suffocating, and for the first time in his carefully curated life, Dorian Blake looked like a man on the verge of collapse. The ballroom's silence still clung to Evelyn's skin as she walked away with her sons, cameras flashing in her wake. Dorian stood frozen, Isla crumbling at his side, and the whispers of betrayal followed them like a rising tide. But beneath the spectacle of that night lay a truth Evelyn had carried for years, tucked away in a folder more damning than DNA results. It began in a quiet office, long before the divorce. The blinds were half drawn, muting the daylight into pale stripes that cut across the carpet. A recorder sat buried deep inside Evelyn's handbag, its red light hidden beneath a scarf. She sat on the leather couch, her posture rigid, her hands clasped in her lap. Across from her, Dorian leaned back in his chair, one ankle perched over his knee. To the therapist, he looked composed. To Evelyn, he looked exactly as he always had. Controlled, rehearsed, every gesture choreographed. I don't understand why we keep circling back to this, he said smoothly. Children are not part of my life plan. I've been clear from the beginning. The therapist, a balding man with gentle eyes, folded his hands. Evelyn has expressed wanting a family. Marriage often evolves, Dorian. Feelings shift. What was true years ago may not hold forever. Dorian's laugh was sharp, humorless. No, what's true stays true. And what's true is this. I do not want children. I never have, I never will. They're anchors. They drain, they destroy. And I refuse to be trapped by them. Evelyn's lips parted, the hurt barely concealed. She glanced at the therapist, then back at her husband. But you agreed, Dorian. You told me once. I told you what you wanted to hear, he cut in, his voice low, cold. Because I knew if I told you the truth, you'd leave. And I wasn't ready for that. Not while I needed you. The therapist shifted in his chair, startled by the candor. So you deceived her? On purpose? Dorian shrugged, unbothered. Marriage is about leverage. She wanted romance, I wanted stability. Everyone gets something. But children? No, I took care of that. Evelyn's brows furrowed. Took care of? What do you mean? Dorian leaned forward, his smile chilling. Birth control. Pills swapped, doses altered. She thought she was careful, but I was more careful. I tampered with everything until I could be sure there wouldn't be a mistake. The therapist's eyes widened. That's not just manipulation, Mr. Blake, that's abuse. Spare me the moral sermon, Dorian said, dismissive. You think she'd stay if she knew? Of course not. But she's here, isn't she? That's all that matters. Evelyn's fingers dug into her lap, her nails pressing crescents into her skin. She kept her face composed, though inside something cracked. And beneath her scarf, the recorder's red light burned steady, capturing every poisoned word. For years afterward, she carried that recording like a hidden blade. Through the divorce filings, the tabloid rumors, the humiliations, she said nothing. She let Dorian walk free, smiling for magazines beside Isla, building his empire of glass. He thought he had erased her, but Evelyn had patience. She had sons. She had the truth sealed on tape, waiting for the night he least expected. Back in the present, in her quiet apartment, the folder sat open on the table beside the DNA results. The recorder was older now, scratched along its edges, but it still worked. Evelyn pressed play. Dorian's voice filled the room, colder than memory. Marriage is about leverage. Children are anchors. I tampered with everything. Her sons slept in the next room, their soft breaths carrying through the door. Evelyn listened in silence, her expression unreadable. Each word reminded her why she had endured the years of waiting. Each syllable sharpened the calm fury she carried like armor. She stopped the tape, rewound it, and slipped it into a newer case. This wasn't for her anymore. This was for Isla, for the guests, for the world that still believed Dorian Blake was untouchable. Her reflection in the darkened window was steady, eyes like stone. It's time, she whispered. And as she placed the tape beside the DNA folder, she knew the storm she had unleashed at the wedding was only the beginning. The smell of smoke clung to Evelyn's hair for days, no matter how many showers she took. It was in the children's clothes, too, woven deep into the fabric, a reminder of how close she had come to losing them all. The fire started just after midnight, a week after the wedding confrontation. She'd been asleep on the couch, the boys curled together in their shared room, when the hiss woke her, a faint sound almost like water rushing in the walls. She sat up, confused, and that's when the first spark came, a blue flicker near the kitchen. Seconds later, the explosion of heat. She ran barefoot across the floor, heart pounding as smoke poured into the hall. "Boys, wake up!" she screamed, pulling them from their beds. Their small arms clung to her neck as she herded them toward the door, flames licking the curtains, the wallpaper curling into ash. By the time they reached the stairwell, the ceiling groaned and the fire alarm wailed like a warning too late. Outside, neighbors crowded the sidewalk, faces pale in the glow of sirens. Evelyn held her children tight, their tears soaking her blouse as firefighters stormed the building. She didn't cry, not yet. Her jaw was set, her eyes locked on the blaze consuming everything she owned. Hours later, when the flames were finally smothered, an investigator approached her. His jacket smelled faintly of soot, his voice measured. "We're not calling this an accident yet. The gas line behind your stove was compromised. Deliberately." Evelyn's breath caught. "Tampered with?" He nodded grimly. "Could have been weeks ago. Could have been yesterday. We'll know more after testing, but this wasn't careless cooking, ma'am." Her mind went instantly to Dorian. His voice echoed from the recording, from years of manipulation. "I took care of that." He had the money, the reach, the arrogance to make something like this disappear under paperwork and excuses. "Do you have anyone who might want to hurt you?" The investigator pressed, her lips parted, then closed again. Saying his name here would mean little. Dorian Blake wasn't just anyone. He was wealth, he was power, he was image. The kind of man who could stand in front of reporters with a perfect smile while ash still smoldered in her walls. "No," she said quietly. "No one I can prove." The investigator studied her face but didn't argue. He handed her a card instead. "If you think of anything, call me." The boys huddled against her side, shivering in borrowed blankets. Evelyn smoothed their hair, kissing each forehead, but her own chest burned with something fiercer than fear. This hadn't been a warning. This had been an attempt, and he would try again. By morning, news stations reported the blaze as a tragic accident, a faulty line, nothing more. The coverage was small, overshadowed by Dorian's honeymoon photographs splashed across glossy magazines. Him and Isla on a yacht, champagne glasses lifted, sunlight bouncing off the sea. Evelyn turned off the television, bile rising in her throat. The timing wasn't coincidence. He was erasing her again, this time with fire. But fire hadn't worked. That night she sat at the edge of the motel bed where she and the boys had been relocated. The folder lay open beside her, the DNA results, the tape, the evidence of his lies. She stared at them until her vision blurred. She whispered to herself, steady and cold, "If he wants war, I'll give him one." And somewhere across the city, Dorian Blake lifted another glass of champagne, the smile on his face flawless as ever, unaware that Evelyn's vengeance had only sharpened in the smoke. The photographs from the honeymoon still cluttered Isla's feed, her smile radiant, his arm possessive around her waist, but the warmth from those sunlit days had already begun to rot. Back in the city, the man she married seemed to shed his charm like a discarded mask. At first, it was small things. The way Dorian would flinch when her phone buzzed. How he snapped when she asked innocent questions about his past. The way his late-night calls always ended abruptly the second she entered the room. Isla told herself it was stress, the aftermath of Evelyn's scene at the wedding. But stress didn't explain the bruising silence in their penthouse, the anger simmering just beneath his carefully curated calm. He became colder, controlling. "You don't need to see your friends right now," he said one morning, his tone deceptively soft. "They'll only fill your head with doubts." When she resisted, his smile vanished, replaced by something sharp and dangerous. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His eyes carried the weight of unspoken threats. At night, when he thought she was asleep, she heard him pacing. The floor creaked in restless patterns. Sometimes he whispered into his phone, his words clipped, almost code-like. She lay frozen under the sheets, her heart thudding in her throat, realizing that the man she had believed loved her, was unraveling before her eyes. One afternoon, while he was in the shower, she opened the closet to search for a scarf. That's when she found it, a black phone tucked inside his suit jacket. Different from his sleek smartphone. Its screen was cracked, its casing scuffed. She hesitated, pulse racing, then powered it on. The messages appeared instantly. "It's done. Gas line handled. Loose ends must disappear. No mistakes this time." She's still talking. "Handle it." Isla's vision blurred. She read them again and again, each word sinking like ice through her chest. Loose ends, gas line. She didn't need Evelyn's recording to tell her what this meant. The fire hadn't been an accident. Her stomach churned as she shoved the phone back where she found it, sliding the jacket carefully to erase any trace of her intrusion. Dorian stepped out minutes later, steam curling behind him, his smile polished, his hair slicked back. "Dinner tonight?" he asked as if nothing had changed. She forced a smile. "Of course." But that night, while he poured wine and lectured her about loyalty, Isla's mind raced. She couldn't unsee those texts. She couldn't unknow the truth. She wasn't a partner. She was a placeholder, a possession. And when her usefulness expired, she would be erased just like Evelyn. The thought made her hands shake. To hide it, she gripped her fork tighter. Across the table, Dorian studied her face too long, as if sensing her fear. His lips curved faintly. "You trust me, don't you?" Her throat tightened. "Yes?" It was a lie, the first of many. Later, while he took a call on the balcony, Isla slipped her phone from her pocket and pressed record. She set it on the counter, angled just so, the red light pulsing like her heartbeat. From that moment forward, she recorded everything. His late-night whispers, his veiled threats, his sudden bursts of rage. Each file was a lifeline, proof, insurance. She knew she was living with a man who had already tried to burn his past to ash. And sooner or later, she feared he would strike again. The recordings Isla made grew heavier by the night, each file a shadow she carried in silence. But proof of Dorian's cruelty didn't just live inside her phone. Other voices, long silenced, began to rise. It started with a journalist podcast. Evelyn hadn't spoken directly, but whispers of her ordeal had circulated through people who once worked in the Blake household. One of them, her voice distorted and her name withheld, agreed to speak on record. "I was hired when Evelyn was pregnant," the woman's voice said, trembling through static. Dorian insisted I call him Sir, never by his name. At first I thought he was just particular, but the longer I stayed, the more wrong it felt. The interviewer's voice pressed gently. "Wrong in what way?" The nanny paused. There were cameras, too many. Not just in the hallways or the living room. He had them installed in the nursery, hidden in the stuffed animals in the corners where light wouldn't catch. I asked Evelyn once and she brushed it off, said Dorian wanted to keep the boys safe, but I saw her flinch every time one of those little red lights blinked. The sound of paper shuffling filled the silence. Then the woman continued, and the bruises. I never meant to pry, but she couldn't hide them all. Her arms, her back. Once I caught her covering her ribs before slipping into her robe. She smiled like it was nothing, like she'd walked into a door. But kids don't make marks like that, and Evelyn was too careful. I wanted to say something, but Dorian, he had this way of looking at you like he already knew your secrets. Like he could ruin you if you opened your mouth. Her voice cracked faintly. One night, Evelyn called me into the nursery. She showed me a button she'd had installed under the changing table, a panic button wired to the security system. She said it was for emergencies in case the children were in danger. But the way she said it, the nanny exhaled hard, the sound of fear etched into the recording. It wasn't the kids she was afraid for. It was herself, the interviewer asked. Why didn't you come forward then? Because I was scared. Because Dorian wasn't just a man, he was a brand. Everyone loved him. The charming entrepreneur, the genius investor. No one would have believed me. I didn't even fully believe myself. I told myself Evelyn was exaggerating, that I was imagining the bruises, that maybe the cameras really were for protection. But then, the line faltered, heavy with guilt. Then I saw him grab her wrist one night when he thought no one was looking. She didn't even cry out. She just froze like it had happened before, too many times. The recording ended with a hollow silence before the nanny whispered her final thought. If anyone asks me to testify, I will. But I'm afraid he'll find out I spoke. Afraid he'll come for me too. The podcast episode spread quickly online. Evelyn's name veiled but unmistakable in context. Isla listened to it alone, her blood running cold. The bruises, the cameras, the panic button, it all fit with what she already knew. Dorian wasn't just manipulative. He was dangerous, calculated, and the people who had lived closest to him had lived in fear. She set her phone down on the counter, her own recordings pulsing red in the dark. She knew the nanny was right to be afraid. Dorian had erased threats before, and if he suspected Isla was one of them, he would not hesitate to do it again. The podcast still echoed in Isla's ears long after she switched off her phone. The nanny's trembling voice, the bruises, the panic button, it was everything Isla had begun to suspect, stitched together in a way that made denial impossible. She sat alone in the penthouse kitchen, the city glittering through the glass behind her, and realized the truth with a chill that hollowed her chest. She wasn't the wife. She was the replacement, the next victim waiting her turn. That night, when Dorian drifted into his office with a glass of scotch and a call she wasn't allowed to overhear, Isla made her move. She padded barefoot to the guest bedroom, closed the door, and pulled out a prepaid phone she had bought 2 days earlier in secret. With trembling fingers, she scrolled through the number she'd searched, hesitated once, then pressed call. The line rang only twice. Hello? Evelyn's voice was wary, taut with suspicion. Don't hang up, Isla whispered, clutching the phone as if it might bite. It's me, Isla. A pause. Then a sharp inhale. Why are you calling? Because, Isla said, her throat tightening. I think he's going to do to me what he did to you. Silence stretched across the line. Isla pictured Evelyn standing somewhere dark, maybe with her boys asleep in the next room, weighing whether this was a trap. Finally, Evelyn's voice returned, low and steady. You chose him. You married him knowing what he'd done. I didn't know everything, Isla shot back, her voice trembling but urgent. But now I do. I found the burner phone. I've seen the messages about the fire, about tying up loose ends. And I've been recording him. Another pause. The sound of Evelyn exhaling. Recordings? Yes, his threats, his late-night calls. Proof he's planning something. Proof he's dangerous. Isla's voice cracked. If he did this to you, he can do worse to me. The line was so quiet Isla thought Evelyn might hang up. But then, what do you want from me? An alliance, Isla said quickly. You and me. We can't fight him alone, but together. Her voice faltered, then steadied. I have access to his records, emails, transfers, all the things he thinks he's hidden from you. Offshore accounts, private investigators, payoffs. I can get them. If you'll help me. The silence now felt different. Less suspicion, more consideration. Evelyn's breath was slow, deliberate. Why should I trust you? Because I'm already risking my life just making this call, Isla whispered. because the only thing we have in common is him, and that's enough. When Evelyn finally spoke again, her voice was softer, almost reluctant. Meet me tomorrow. Somewhere public, somewhere he won't think to look. Relief surged through Isla so sharply it made her knees weak. Yes, anywhere. Just tell me where. The next afternoon they sat across from each other in a corner cafe far from the glossy towers of Dorian's world. To the outside eye they looked like opposites. Isla, polished and delicate, still wrapped in the shell of the perfect bride. Evelyn, older, sharper, her eyes carved by years of survival. But between them an unspoken thread connected, two women bound by one man's cruelty. Evelyn stirred her coffee, her gaze fixed on Isla. If you're lying to me, if this is one of his games— It's not, Isla interrupted, desperation cutting through her composure. She slid a small USB drive across the table, her hand shaking. Emails, bank transfers. He thinks I don't look at his computer, but I do. I see everything. Evelyn stared at the drive, then back at Isla. For a long moment her face betrayed nothing. Then slowly she closed her hand over it. You're right, she said finally. We can't fight him alone. The air between them shifted, heavy but resolute. The alliance was fragile, born of fear and necessity, but it was real. As they left the cafe, neither woman noticed the man in the corner watching them. Phone pressed to his ear, and far above the city, in a glass-walled office, Dorian Blake leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he listened to the voice on the other end. The cafe meeting haunted Isla all the way home. Every streetlight looked like an eye, every car behind her a shadow sent by him. She tucked the USB drive deep into her purse and prayed the cameras in the penthouse hadn't caught the strain in her smile when she greeted Dorian that night. He poured her wine, kissed her cheek, and talked about expansion deals in Singapore as if he hadn't nearly burned his past alive. Isla nodded, listening only to the pounding in her ears. When he finally collapsed into bed, scotch-heavy and snoring, she slipped from the sheets. Her bare feet made no sound as she padded to his office. The air smelled faintly of leather and cologne. The dim city glow spilling across the desk, she inserted the USB into her laptop and held her breath as the folders bloomed across the screen. At first it was numbers, rows and rows of them, wire transfers, invoices, account balances. But as she clicked deeper, the numbers turned into trails. Cayman Islands, Zurich, shell companies and names she didn't recognize, offshore accounts holding millions, quietly funneled out of the empire investors believed was clean. Her hand trembled as she opened a folder marked PI Reports. Dozens of scanned documents filled the screen, each stamped with the logo of a private investigator's firm. She scrolled through surveillance photos of Evelyn and the boys, at grocery stores, in parks, leaving the very apartment that had burned. Dates stretched back years. He had known. He had always known. Further down she found hotel receipts. A burner motel in Nevada months before the divorce. Under special instructions, the note read, "No housekeeping. Use back entrance only." Beneath it, another file, a PDF with a chilling subject line, "Paternity cover-up." The document was coded, language flattened into abbreviations, but the meaning was clear enough. DNA suppression, legal manipulation, asset protection. Isla's stomach twisted as she realized what she was reading wasn't just financial maneuvering. It was a strategy to erase Evelyn's children from existence, to ensure investors never learned about heirs that could threaten the dynasty he was building. Her breath fogged faintly in the glow of the screen. She scrolled faster, file after file, until the words blurred. Payments to silence. Offshore shelters. Cover stories prepared. Every entry was another dagger. Every folder another corpse buried under spreadsheets and contracts. For a moment she forgot to breathe. Behind her the penthouse was silent, but she half expected to hear his footsteps at any second. She imagined the weight of his hand on her shoulder, the calm hiss of his voice. "What are you doing, Isla?" Instead, only the hum of the laptop filled the air. She pulled the USB out, clutching it in her palm until her knuckles whitened. She slid it into the lining of her purse, her pulse racing. The evidence was no longer Evelyn's alone. It was hers too. Together it was enough to bring him down, if they lived long enough to use it. Back in the bedroom, Dorian stirred, rolling toward her side of the bed. His hand reached across empty sheets. Isla froze in the doorway, her breath caught. But his hand fell limp again, and his breathing steadied. She eased back under the covers, heart still hammering, the weight of the USB heavy as stone against her thigh. In the dark, her eyes stayed open. Glowing screens burned into her mind. Dorian had built his empire on lies, on theft, on bloodlines he'd tried to bury. And now, for the first time, Isla held the match that could set it all ablaze. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and nerves. Reporters lined the marble steps outside, their cameras snapping as Dorian Blake strode in with his attorneys. A silk tie knotted to perfection, a faint smile pressed onto his lips. He looked untouchable, like a man who had already won. Inside, the gallery was packed. Investors, journalists, even former employees filled the benches, their whispers hushed only when the judge entered. Evelyn sat near the front with her sons, her face calm but rigid. Isla slipped into her seat quietly, her palms damp. The USB drive long since transferred into the hands of investigators. The prosecution opened with the evidence: offshore accounts, encrypted files, burner phone records. Dorian sat unflinching, hands folded, shaking his head like a man bored with routine accusations. When asked to respond, he leaned into the microphone with charm. "Your Honor, these claims are nothing but desperate attempts to smear my name. I've built businesses, jobs, lives. I am not perfect, but I am not a criminal. My ex-wife's bitterness and these fabricated stories don't change the truth." The judge nodded, unimpressed, but Dorian's lawyers smirked. For a moment, it felt like the tide was his again. Then the bailiff called Isla Blake to the stand. She rose slowly, her heels clicking against the tile, each step heavier than the last. Dorian turned his head, eyes narrowing, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. She didn't look at him as she swore the oath, her voice steady though her pulse thundered. "Mrs. Blake," the prosecutor began, "you lived with the defendant after his remarriage. Did you witness anything relevant to this case?" Isla gripped the edge of the stand. Her throat felt tight, but when she spoke, her voice was clear. "Yes, I saw everything." The room shifted. Murmurs rose, then fell as the judge rapped his gavel. She continued, each word like glass breaking. "I found the burner phone. I read the messages about the fire at Evelyn's apartment. Gas line handled. Loose ends must disappear. He told me not to trust anyone, not even myself. He isolated me, controlled me. And when I confronted him, he denied it all, just like he's doing now. But I recorded him. Every threat, every call." Dorian's composure cracked. He leaned forward, whispering furiously to his lawyer, but the gallery's eyes were on Isla. The prosecutor pressed on. "And what about his finances?" She nodded, forcing her hands to stay steady. "I accessed his accounts. I found transfers to offshore banks, payments to investigators tracking Evelyn and her children, documents marked as paternity cover-ups. He knew about those boys for years. He spent money to erase them from his story." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. Evelyn's jaw tightened, her hand resting on her son's shoulders. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Blake, are you willing to provide these recordings and documents to the court?" "Yes," Isla said firmly. "I already have." Dorian shot up from his chair, his mask shattering. "She's lying." His voice cracked through the chamber. "She's been manipulated, poisoned against me. This is a conspiracy." The judge's gavel slammed. "Mr. Blake, sit down." But Dorian couldn't stop. His face flushed, his charm disintegrating into raw fury. "You think you can destroy me with this circus? I made all of you. You wouldn't exist without me." The room erupted. Reporters shouted, the gallery stirred. Evelyn's boys buried their faces against her arms. The judge hammered the gavel again, his voice commanding order. When silence returned, his tone was iron. "This court will launch an immediate investigation into the alleged arson, the financial fraud, and the paternity claims. Until then, Mr. Blake, your assets are frozen and your movements restricted." Dorian collapsed back into his chair, eyes wild, sweat beading on his forehead. His lawyers whispered frantically, but the damage was done. The mask was gone. From the stand, Isla finally looked at him, not with fear, but with clarity. And in the gallery, Evelyn allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The empire of Dorian Blake was beginning to crumble, and this time, the whole world was watching. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and spread the word, and tell us where you're watching from. The backyard smelled of frosting and summer grass. A single table stood beneath the oak tree, covered in mismatched plates and streamers Evelyn had strung up herself. 4 boys leaned over the cake, their cheeks glowing in the late afternoon light. Eyes squeezed shut as they made wishes only children could carry without shame. "On 3, Evelyn called, her voice steady but warm. 1, 2, 3. They blew together, 4 pairs of lungs scattering the candle's smoke into the air. The flames vanished in unison, their laughter ringing out as applause rose from the handful of neighbors and friends who had gathered. Evelyn clapped with them, her palms stinging, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years. Safety. From the porch, she watched them dive into the cake, smearing icing across each other's faces, the sound of joy echoing where silence used to live. It had been a year since the trial, a year since the empire of Dorian Blake crumbled in full view of the world. Inside the kitchen, still wrapped in its original paper, sat a box addressed in Isla's careful handwriting. She never came in person, it was too dangerous, too entangled, but every year she sent gifts. Small things the boys treasured, puzzles, storybooks, matching sweaters. Evelyn had once resented her, seen her only as the younger replacement. But now she recognized Isla as something else, another survivor. Another woman who had lived in the shadow of a man's lies and chosen to step into the light. Evelyn leaned against the porch railing, the late sun warming her face. She thought about Dorian then, caged behind concrete walls and iron bars, his charm wasted on guards who had heard it all before. No champagne toasts, no cameras flashing, just the scrape of a tray, the taste of food he couldn't order, the silence of power stripped away. The boys shouted for her to join them. "Mama, come play," one called, his cheeks sticky with icing. She smiled, stepping down from the porch, but her eyes lingered on the cake for just a moment longer. It wasn't a store-bought cake this year. She had baked it herself, each layer imperfect, each letter in frosting slightly uneven. Across the top, in bold red icing, it read, "To the truth." As the boys tugged her hands and pulled her into their circle, Evelyn let the moment sink in. For years she had lived under control, under fear, under silence. Now the noise of laughter filled her home, her children's voices drowning out the echoes of the man who had tried to erase them. The candles were gone, the wishes sealed. Justice hadn't come clean or easy or without scars. But it had come. And as the sun dipped lower, Evelyn realized she no longer had to look over her shoulder. The empire was gone. The mask was shattered. The truth had won. She bent to kiss each boy on the forehead, tasting sugar and smoke on their skin, her voice soft but sure.
"Happy birthday, my loves." And for the first time in years, the words felt like freedom,